Coming up on Theater Talk.
Smash failed because I wasn't in it enough.
Smash failed because you were in it, Riedel. That was the problem.
If it had lasted a third season, I was going to become a huge character in the whole production.
And then they canceled it.
Shocking.
Theater Talk is made possible in part by the CUNY TV Foundation.
Here in Amherst, I'm known as Squire Edward Dickinson's half-cracked daughter. Well, I am. The neighbors can't figure me out. I don't cross my father's ground to any house or town. I haven't left the house in years. When the censor taker asked my occupation, I just said, at home.
From New York City, this is Theater Talk. I'm Susan Haskins.
And I'm Michael Riedel of the New York Post. Now, you know, Susan, when I was a kid, the great Joely Harris toured through my town in Rochester, New York, with the Belle of Amherst, the great play about Emily Dickinson. And I remembered, I think I must have been 10 or 11 when I saw it. It was one of the very first things I saw in the theater. I fell in love with Joely Harris, and I fell in love with Emily Dickinson, and I fell in love with the theater.
Well, if you fell in love with Joely Harris in this role, you are ecstatic over our guest tonight in this role.
Well, I'm always in love with one of the great acting families, the Redgraves, and we have one of the daughters here with us tonight, Joely Richardson. Welcome to Theater Talk, who is giving Joely Harris, I must say, a run for her money, and that's a very good run, as Emily Dickinson in a revival of the Belle of Amherst at the West Side Theater, directed by Steve Cosson. So welcome to Theater Talk, both of you.
Well, thank you very much. So it was, you were 10.
I was 10. Well, Joely was an old-fashioned actress in the sense that she believed in touring.
That's what just impressed me, just hearing you say that and thinking, gosh, she toured with this, she did it for 3 years.
Can you imagine being so enraptured with this role, which you do beautifully, that you would hang on and keep doing it and touring it?
I think it is one of those roles that comes along very, very rarely, and it's sort of stupendous and it's sort of different. And you know, my friends that have come, they've said, God, it's special, and people can't quite put their fingers, so I can completely see how young boys would go and see a magical lady, obviously I'm not talking about myself, but up there on the stage, dressed all in white, saying these incredible things about life, about the spheres, about, you know, Earth is short, which is a funny sentence she has. Earth is short, not life is short. She actually has life is short as well. But really talking about life in this sort of very magical way. It's very profound. People keep saying to me, are you having fun? Are you having fun? And fun's not the exact word, because it's tough. It's a tough role.
You are out there by
need
yourself.
every muscle.
Correct.
The second act is incredibly emotional. And someone at the stage door said to me last night, gosh, are you okay? You know, do you have a cold, your sinuses? And I was like, no, that's all the crying. I have this unfortunate thing that when I cry, my nose runs. And so probably, you know, everyone's thinking, poor love, she has a terrible cold, week in, week out.
That's exactly what I asked Joely Harris when I was at the stage door at 10 years old.
No way.
You have a cold, Miss Harris?
You would have made me, I wish you'd said yes, and I'd have feel less inadequate.
I'm teasing,
But you know what, I never met Joely, but from interviews that I've seen, she just seems like such a beautiful lady, and I'm inspired by her.
Let's bring Steve into the conversation here. We weren't meaning to neglect you, Steve.
That's okay.
Now, she's stepping in to fill the shoes of the great Joely Harris, but Charles Nelson Riley, who was on the show back in the day, he was the original director of the Belle of Amherst.
Indeed he was.
Have you plucked anything from his original production? Have you seen any notes or studied any stage directions he may have come up with?
Oh, I mean, all we have is the stage directions in the script, some of which we used, some of which we did not use.
They've reinvented this from
I think
the
it's
other.
very, what we're doing is very
different.
Very different from the...
Is it more edgy?
You're more athletic, and we were talking about your chakras are open. More.
You're taller.
More exuberant.
I actually can't wait when this is all over. I do really want to see Joely Harris's one.
I read an interview with you in the Wall Street Journal that you started to watch, because it was made for taped for PBS, I remember.
Yeah.
And you started to watch it, and then you said, I can't can't watch any more of this?
Yeah, it was a couple of months ago when I just needed to hear the New England sound, and I couldn't. I was away. I was on holiday, and I had to start getting the idea of the New England sound, and it's very difficult because, you know, in 1880, say, how did people speak? It's not as it is now. And so I thought, oh, well, I'll just see. And then I was surprised to see I watched 5 mintes, and I was like, I can't watch anymore. It's
Did
just,
you watch it, Steve, in your preparations to direct?
I did. I watched it once. So I watched it the day that I got the call from my agent saying, would you want to put yourself up for the Belle of Amherst, which I knew, but I'd never read it, I'd never seen it. And I had about a couple hours before the phone call the next morning, and I found it on YouTube.
This is a very different kind of project. You did the
Mr. Burns, a post-electric
wonderful,
play. Yeah, that
wonderful,
was
but
last year.
very different. So, Jolie, why did they hire Steve?
Ask
Oh,
Steve.
yeah, I'll see.
Yeah, why did you ask Steve?
I got hired first.
Oh, you got hired first.
Yes.
Oh,
There's generally the director, and then they decide on the casting, Susan.
Yeah.
I know you don't know much about the theater, but that's how it works.
well,
Well,
sometimes.
no, she's right. It can
Sometimes
work
it goes the other
I
way.
have to
Yeah.
defend myself, Michael Riedel. There's plenty of times they come up with the star first.
I had heard that you weren't completely on board. I certainly didn't hire Steve. It was all Don Gregory, our producer.
Yeah.
It was
Who did it
nothing to do
originally,
with
I believe,
me,
Don.
Who did it originally.
Yeah. No, I was on board for a few months. I just didn't have an executed contract because that takes a while sometimes.
So I'm going to ask a more uber question. Why Emily Dickinson? Why are we so fascinated by this woman, this reclusive woman who spent the majority of her life in her house with her spinster sister and a lot of it taking care of her mother? Why is she one of the most important American poets, or one of the most important poets in the English language? Why?
That is an uber question. I mean, I'll start with a somewhat obnoxious answer, which is I think that she's important for us to watch because she is one of the greatest American poets. I mean, why she's one of the greatest American poets is probably a longer answer, but...
And a more metaphysical.
Well,
More metaphysical, but I think the power, her words are like swords. They really just slice right through you. So contemporary, so modern. Back to you.
Yeah, and they are, as a great singular artist, I think part of why she works for a play and why this play worked in the 1970s, why it works now, is because she was a singular creation. She created herself. She was certainly drawing on all sorts of knowledge and things that she read and other writers, and it's not like she was an outsider artist, but her force of originality and her force of vision were sui generis. Am I pronouncing that right? I'm not entirely sure. And
She also, she had a whole new style, which is why, you know, her great maestro or preceptor, Professor Higginson, didn't get her, but he also didn't get Walt Whitman. You know, he said all these dashes, it's very uncontrolled, there are bad rhymes. Yes, it was, yeah, and she, you know, she defended herself saying, my meter is new, experimental, not spasmodic.
even though she was, I think, agoraphobic, or whatever you want to diagnose it, like she did not go outside.
And they don't really know why, do they? That she didn't.
Well,
They
yes.
don't really know why.
I mean, it seems she had a breakdown. They think that between the ages of 30 and 32, but other people say this didn't happen. And in our play, she says it's not important, or I'm going to slant the truth. I think she did become agoraphobic, but then she did work in her garden and she did visit her brother's house. So they didn't have, I think, the labels then that
And a lot
we
of
have now.
rush off to get Prozac.
And she wasn't famous. People were not.
She wasn't famous. Yeah.
People weren't writing about her or studying her.
Well,
She
I, mean,
was,
I think the plays always work so well because her poetry is autobiographical. I mean, really, what we know of her, we know through her thoughts in the poems.
and there's a lot which is deeply personal, and the play works, I think, so well, and because the playwright William Luce is able to, you know, go right from a letter to a scene with somebody into the poem that seems to spring directly out of that relationship, you know, in a pretty compelling and convincing way. But she also created characters in her poems. In some of her poems, she's a boy.
Yeah. And also she is naughty, and that was actually one of the first things that I responded to reading the play, is that it wasn't like worthy, and it wasn't, you know, she's naughty and she's mischievous, and she's playing with the audience, like right off the bat, giving them this sort of ludicrous recipe for a cake, and she's sort of saying, this is my take on life, it's not linear.
Every American was introduced to Emily Dickinson at some point in school, and whether our teacher was good or mediocre or whatever, we got some impression of her. And certainly for my generation, you know, I think the impression that I got in middle school or whenever we first read her was she was a recluse. She never married. She never left her house. She made these very intricate, you know, small poems. And then you extrapolate a personality from that. You fill in the gaps and you think, oh, she's a quiet, shy, Victorian woman. And so when I first actually, you know, read the play and did watch the Julie Harris version on YouTube, and you're hit with this personality. I mean, it's delightful and it's engaging, and it really messes with your idea of who Emily Dickinson was. And then you realize, oh, this idea of Emily Dickinson in my head is
no more valid than
wrong.
William Luce's version of her, because
exactly.
we really don't know.
We watched a lot of documentaries, didn't we? We did quite a lot of research, and in some of them, you know, she could also be aggressive and disturbing. She was a whole package.
Yeah, so much of the play comes from her words. Most of it is her language, from her letters, from something that is known that she said to someone, and she's funny, and she's caustic, and she's sneaky, and
she likes a gossip sometimes.
She likes a gossip. She had affairs.
Well, we disagree on this.
Define affairs, but
it's interesting that everyone can have different opinions on it.
I mean,
you think she had affairs with?
If you read 20 years of love letters back and forth with someone, I would call that an affair, whether you
Consummated.
ever.
And you think she was a virgin?
I do, actually, yes. I'm going to go on record saying
No, I would say
she's
she's
a virgin.
probably a.
She
I would
might have
say that
kissed
she's
a girlfriend or something, but I would say maybe she even kissed one of the gentlemen, but I doubt it. I have a feeling she was a virgin.
I'm with you. I have that feeling too. All right.
We can't fight with the women. It's
we
a revival of the Belle of Amherst by William Luce at the West Side Theater, starring Joely Richardson. Thank you for being our guest tonight at Theater Talk, and directed by Steve Cosson. Thank you very much, Steve.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell, they banish us, you know. How dreary to be somebody. How public, like a frog, to tell one's name the livelong June to an admiring bog.
So, Michael, I have invited my two new best friends to our show today, and I'll let you introduce them.
These are two great friends of mine and two terrific reporters here covering the Broadway scene. And we're going to bring you up to speed on all the stuff that's been happening as we're midway through the fall season on Broadway. I want to introduce my good friend Stephanie Cohen of the Wall Street Journal. Welcome to Theater Talk, and I believe this is your debut on television.
It is. Thank
Don't
you
be
for
nervous.
having me.
Don't be nervous. And my old sparring partner from the Don Imus Show and Hollywood and Vine, Imogen, Lloyd, who's a reporter for Broadway.com. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you for having us.
To Theater Talk. All right, Imogen, about a year ago, I guess, you and I hosted a viewing party for The Sound of Music on NBC. Turned out to be one of the highest rated things NBC has done in a long time.
22 million viewers.
22 million viewers, that's right. And they're coming back in December with Peter Pan, even though you and I lobbied for some other shows, but they picked Peter Pan.
I'm not entirely sure about Peter Pan. I mean, the one thing about Sound of Music is that everybody can sing along. Everybody knows every single song. Right. And Peter Pan, although it obviously has this amazing history of telecasts and so forth, I'm not sure that the score is as well known.
I could sing you every song.
You're the first person.
No, please.
Sing one.
You think it's bad when I sing, Imogen? Listen to her.
Mary Martin's Peter Pan was on when I was a child, and I'm telling you, it's a very catchy score. You just
I'm
can't-
And your demographic will know it.
It is riskier, I think. It's a
risky.
riskier undertaking than, say, Sound of Music. And indeed, Fox have been talking about doing Grease, haven't they? And that makes perfect sense to me because everybody knows every single
Song from Grease.
And that's the whole point, is that we sat there at our party and we had a little bit of wine. It was very strange. Michael Riedel. We sat there and we sang along. Everybody knew every word. Oh, shut
I
up,
did not.
Riedel.
I did not.
The thing that excites me about this upcoming broadcast of Peter Pan is Captain Hook, Christopher Walken, who I think could give a terrific villainous performance, don't you?
I think that people will tune in just to see him
Yeah.
do it in his strange accent, Captain Hook with his inflection.
Yeah, it's going to be quite camp, I think.
We have a picture of Allison Williams here. She's wearing this Peter Pan outfit that seems to be made out of lizards. I mean, we know it's made out of plastic, but it looks like Peter Pan's been out skinning lizards all day. Zayden and Marin, why do you have him out there being, you know, a killer? Why can't he wear leaves like Mary Martin?
I mean, it's always interesting with this particular producing pair because they've got all these Broadway vets in to to steady the ship, as it were.
Craig Zayden, Neil Marin, yeah.
So the Lost Boys are all newsies. You've got Christian Ball, who's in everything. He was in The Sound of Music Live. He was
He's
also
my
in
co-star in Smash.
Yes. And of course, Kelly O'Hara, who will be seen this season actually in The King and I. She'll be doing that in Lincoln Center in the spring.
Craig and Neil, Zayden and Neil Marin, have just hooked up with the Schubert organization, and they're going to be producing shows with the Schuberts.
Yeah.
And the Schuberts have not produced shows in a long
In
time.
a while. I mean, they've signed this 3-year deal. Now, of course, Neil and Craig have been dipping their toes into Broadway, not just with Smash.
Right.
They put some money into How to Succeed with
Promises,
Derek Radcliffe.
Promises, they did with Kristen Chenoweth.
So they do love Broadway. I am fully expecting an announcement at the end of December that Peter Pan will be coming into a Schubert house. The Schuberts, of course, own 17 Broadway theatres. So I'm almost, I mean, you can just see that happening now, can't you? That there'll be a revival of Peter Pan after this telecast in December.
With the numbers that Sound of Music did, if Peter Pan does that, you gin up interest in the show, and then you go direct to Broadway, and you can make a fortune.
Zayden and Marin were doing downtown theater, and then I first became aware of them when they produced the TV movie directed by Rob Marshall of Annie, which really established his movie career. And then they were doing this, Zayden and Marin were bringing in redoing plays.
Yeah.
I think they did The Music Man with Matthew Broderick and those things. So now they're turning it all the way around, going back to Broadway.
I just find it funny that like shows about Broadway, which I would think would be inherently so dramatic and fun, like Smash, which they also did.
Yes.
They fail, but then they have the telecasts.
And they do the Oscars.
And there's an audience for it, but
Yeah.
why, how come the dramatic shows about, or the sitcoms about Broadway never
I mean,
work?
Smash failed because I wasn't in it enough.
Smash failed because you were in it, Riedel. That was the problem.
You would
If
think
it had
that-
lasted a third season, I was going to become a huge character in the whole
thank
production.
and then they
Goodness, it didn't.
canceled
And then
it.
they canceled it.
Shocking.
Stephanie, you wanted to bring up On the Town. Now, I haven't seen it yet, and I must say, as much as I love the old Broadway musicals, I am not sure there's an audience for them anymore. I mean, they sound like your grandmother's show. On the Town, great show in its day. Comden and Green,
Have you seen it?
Bernstein. No, I've not seen it, but I've seen old productions of it. But I'm just my point
okay.
is though that I don't think there's any interest in these old shows. But you, a younger person, much younger than Susan, you really like On the Town, right?
Well, I went in expecting what you're saying, that it would be, you know, creaky or kind of dusty or whatever. And it's so raunchy. And really beautiful as well, because it has Jerome Robbins inspired choreography. It's about these 3 guys trying to get laid in New York for one day. The sailors, you know, come to town and they are all looking to get laid. But
The sexuality.
yes,
Sexual energy.
and the songs are
Young men.
hilarious.
Yeah.
And it has roles for great character actors. Jackie Hoffman is hilarious.
But if done well and if done properly, it should in the end also have poignancy, because it's entirely possible that these 3 sailors who are going back to war,
Right.
all 3 may be killed. This may be the
It ends on
hurrah
a very
of their
sad
lives.
note.
Yeah, where is the time all gone to? Haven't done half the things we...
Please,
Right, it does. And they're going back to war,
war.
and they'll never see the women again, maybe.
And it is the quintessential American musical. I mean, you stand there, you have to stand for the national anthem, there's a flag.
Right.
I, of course, don't know the words. Everybody's looking at me going, who are you? You're a dreadful human being. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not going to try and sing this. There's no way. I can, God save the Queen. Anyway, but it's a quintessential American musical, and it is very good for families. So you're saying, who's the audience? That's the audience. Whereas, say, Sting coming in with The Last Ship, which is a new musical, that's a much bigger risk, let's say, for a producer than On the Town.
Yeah, and also the Sting musical has not been selling that well, and I do know that Sting was a little bit concerned about the box office, and I think
How do you know that?
Because I'm called a reporter. And I think what Sting has discovered is that people want to see Sting in concert.
Right.
They don't necessarily care that Sting wrote the score.
The show I'm recommending to people the most is The Curious
Oh,
Incident.
me
Yeah.
too. It's my favorite.
I just
That's for kids and grandparents. I mean, that works on so
I
many
wonder
levels
what-
too.
It's
At
called The
what-
Curious Incident of the Dog
in the nighttime. Thank you, Mike. Oh, I wonder at what age it starts being appropriate, but it's
Probably
wonderful.
like 7,
Really?
8. I feel like that's
older
the
than that.
bit older.
I would say 11.
Yeah.
But
11.
whatever, it's wonderful.
This extraordinary piece of theatre, it is mind-blowingly good. I mean, to me, it's what theatre is supposed to be all about. From the sets to the acting to the script, it's just seamless. And what is great, I think, is that there are no big stars attached to it.
Yeah.
And so often now with plays, especially on Broadway, you have Hugh Jackman come in for 3 months. And it's great for Broadway that Hugh Jackman does want to come. It's great that Bradley Cooper's here. It's great that the Gyllenhaal siblings are in this season. But at the same time, to have a show that's just here because of the work, I mean, that's
But
extraordinary.
that speaks to how the national, being subsidized, theater that's subsidized, it's not expected to do well. It's just they want to actually make an artistic
Well,
piece.
it's expected
this
to do
is
well on
expected.
And this
television.
came from, right, but it wasn't when they started it, because I spoke to Simon Stevens and to the director, Marion Elliott, and she said, you know, they wanted to see if we could adapt this best-selling book, and they gave us a tiny theater.
Yeah.
I think it were like 40 performances it was scheduled for.
Really?
So they were allowed to do whatever they wanted. It was given a budget, and it was not supposed to make a profit, which is why, like Matilda.
No, Matilda was the
Yeah.
Royal Shakespeare
Royal
Company.
Shakespeare Company.
Right.
And that was also, that was a risk.
Because it's so
risk too.
creative. They don't have to think of the lowest common denominator or what's going to be commercial or bringing in a big star.
Bringing in Carrie Underwood because she's a record.
And this country doesn't have that, and you see it.
It's tough. I mean, 1 in 5 Broadway shows make money.
Is that right?
It's a huge risk. And also just the money that goes into Broadway shows. It's $2.5 million at least for a play, $10 million at least for a
least for a
musical.
musical now.
And that's 3 times what it is in London. So even if you're producing commercially in London, it's a lot cheaper. So therefore, producers are obviously a bit more wary, especially in America, about what they're going to produce. But also theatre goers are, because their tickets are 3 times more than they are in London.
Yeah.
So in London, you're going to get an audience that may take a risk to go and see Curious Incident because the tickets are less. Whereas
You'll
here
get younger people.
Whereas here, they're going to have to put out that much more money.
You want to go see Matthew Broderick and Nathan Lane, and
Yeah.
it's only a play. It's going to cost you $275 for seats.
But
in row
everyone
X.
wants to go see it.
We've got to wrap it up. What are you looking forward to coming up in the later fall here, or the winter, or the spring? Is there a production that you've got your eye on?
I'm
that's
excited to
exciting?
see The Real Thing. I'm going.
Tom Stoppard's old
Yeah,
play. Yeah.
I love Tom Stoppard, and I like the club. I think it's intellectual and doesn't cater to people that just want sort of bland entertainment or
And where's it
commercial
playing?
entertainment. That's actually at Roundabout.
Not exactly a big risk for the Roundabout to do
No,
a,
but they
to do a
did bring
Tony
in-
Award-winning Tom Stoppard play that's 30 years
But
old.
they did bring in a play that's never been done in New York of his, because he said if you want to do The Real Thing, do
India.
yeah.
Which is quite a good play.
Which is a great play and kind of a precursor, or actually it was written after, but it's sort of a version of Arcadia. that
Arcadia,
deals
very
with those,
similar, yeah.
Yeah, those same.
And anything you want to draw our attention to, Emily, that's coming up?
I'm fascinated by Hugh Jackman's choice of The River, which is a small play that was in London's Royal Court Theatre.
Yep.
And he's doing it in a very small venue, let's face it here, Circle in the Square. And I'm fascinated to see why he picked that.
Have you read the play? Do you know the play?
I know nothing about the play, and I'm looking forward to seeing why he's doing this three-hander and not a great big Broadway show, because he could do anything.
He could, but I think that he's been casting about for a musical. He just hasn't found one yet, and he likes to come to Broadway at least every other year. So if the big musical doesn't come together, he's going to look for
What happened
play
to
to do.
Houdini?
He dropped out.
He made like Houdini, and he vanished from the project.
I think when Sorkin escaped, it was around the time that Sorkin went as well. Jackman.
Aaron
dropped
Sorkin
the
was
project.
going to write it. Yeah, but it is a risk for him because he became famous on Broadway doing The Boy from Oz, which was not a great musical, but he turned it into a great theatrical event. But I'm not so sure he wants to have to do that again and carry a $15 million musical that's not great on your back for a year. That's heavy lifting. I mean, poor Nathan Lane had to do that with the Addams Family, and they'll all tell you it's not fun to be in a show that isn't any good. So they want to pick something that they know is going to be as good as they will be as a performer.
This is a risk too, because it's a short play and it's an unknown play, and people like to see him in musicals.
Yeah, but remember, it's a limited run. It's only 12 or 13 weeks. It's Hugh Jackman, so no matter what happens, it's going to sell out.
You can't do a big musical as a limited run.
Yeah.
Well, I just think people want to see him singing and dancing.
They do. But you know, until
He's a great actor.
until he finds something to sing and dance in, they'll have to make do with showing off that he's a dramatic actor. So. All right, Stephanie Cohen from the Wall Street Journal and my friend Imogen Lloyd Webber from Imus in the Morning, Hollywood and Vine, and Broadway.com. Thank you for being our pundits and our commentators, and for bringing the average age of our guests down by about 30,000 years.
How old is Michael?
Much, ladies. I'm 48-ish.
Well.
Are we gonna say goodnight? Say goodnight.
Oh,
Say goodnight.
put the camera on me.
Oh God,
the
no,
camera-
no.
Please.
We have these two beautiful women. Why the camera on you?
Good night, Michael. Again, it's been such a pleasure.
Good night, Imogen. Good night, Stephanie.
You guys are insane.
New York, New York, New York. It's a hell of a town. We've got one day here and not another minute to see the famous sights.
We'll find the romance and danger waiting in it beneath the Broadway lights.
But we've hair on our chests, so what we like the best are the nights. Sights, New York, New York, a hell of a town. The Bronx is up, but the Battery's down. The people ride in a hole in the ground. New York, New York, it's a hell of a town.
Our thanks to the Friends of Theater Talk for their significant contribution to this production. Theater Talk is made possible in part by the Frederick Lowe Foundation, the Corey and Bob Donnelly Charitable Fund, the Noel Coward Foundation, Carrie J. Fries, the Dorothy Strelson Foundation, plus public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs, the New York State Council on the Arts, a state agency, and the Theater Development Fund's Technical Accessibility Program, which helps provide closed captioning.
We welcome your questions or comments for Theater Talk. Thank you and good night.